Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Well, first of all, I want to ask everyone that if you're not subscribed to the channel, to click down here. We have here today Dr. Attila Demkó. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. My Hungarian is not really that good. He's the head of the geopolitics at Matthias Corvinus Collegium here in Budapest, and the author of the trilogy of the Tsar, under the pen name of David Altair. It's a geopolitical fiction series about US manipulation in Russian hybrid warfare using national minorities in Central and Eastern Europe. Dr. Demkó, thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for your invitation. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And we also have in the panel Katia from Curitiba, myself, Eduardo Leitão, here in Budapest as well. And I'm going to start shooting the first question. So, Dr. Demkó, why does NATO want to get so close to the Russian borders? I think that's the question that everybody's asking themselves at this very moment.
Yes, so NATO is a defensive alliance. That's what we say. I was working in NATO in Brussels for 2 years, and I was working in the Ministry of Defense for 16 years. So I know quite a lot about NATO. It's a defensive alliance, and you know, I believe myself that Russians shouldn't be worried about NATO or before this war. But the word is like that, you know, Russia is a great country, a great power. And, you know, they don't think in what we want, but they think what they fear of. So for NATO, it was like a normal process that countries who can join, why not join? So that's how Hungary joined, my country. That's how Poland joined. That's how the Baltic states joined, Romania joined. A lot of countries joined NATO since the end of the Cold War. But the problem started when it really got close to Russia. And it started in 2008 with the invitation of Ukraine and Georgia to NATO, when the Russians felt that they are threatened now, obviously threatened by NATO. And whatever we told the Russians that you are not threatened, they believe that NATO can have some bad intentions on Russia. And they also lost a lot of money with NATO expansion. We have to see that military arms are a big export item. So before we were part of Russian alliance system, Soviet alliance system, we bought arms, we bought a lot of things from Russia. So today, Hungary is buying for $10 billion weapons. We are not buying from Russia. So that was the other reason Russians were very angry about NATO expansion. But the last reason is Ukraine itself. Ukraine for Russia is like a brother. So it's like it's a terrible war, what we saw today, but it's a war between two brothers in a way the Russians see. The Ukrainians, I don't think they see Russia a brother anymore. But the main thing is that Ukraine is so close to Russia, so close to Moscow, the Ukrainian borders, that they really saw it as an immediate danger to the security of Russia. And that's why they were angry. For NATO, for the United States, I think we were, and especially the Americans, were either very naive, not understanding what the Russians were saying, or they didn't care what the Russians were saying about Ukraine and Georgia. So that's how we are in this terrible situation. Now we have 3 wars because of this NATO expansion. 2008 against Georgia, which is the south of Russia, against, it's a small country south of Russia, like Uruguay to Brazil. It's really a small country. But Ukraine is a big country. It's like Argentine compared to Brazil, if I can make a comparison. So can you imagine Argentine allied with somebody who you think that it's a big threat to Brazil? So that's why they reacted this way.
I understand that, but one thing that really puzzles me about this whole geographical proximity with Russia is there wasn't a lot of issues with the Balkans joining NATO. So why is that such a big issue for Ukraine? I know Ukraine is much closer to Russia culturally even, but so are the Balkans in many ways. And there was not all this ado that we see right now.
Yeah, well, you know, in the Balkans, very small countries joined NATO. We have Croatia in the Balkans, which has 4 million people. And we have another NATO member, North Macedonia, which has 2 million people. And we have the third one is Montenegro with 600,000 people. But Montenegro was painful for Russia. The Russians were very angry about Montenegro. Ukraine has 40 million people. Ukraine has a big military industry, and Ukraine has a lot of common history with Russia. So that's the difference. Ukraine is the biggest country of the former Soviet Union after Russia, and it was part of the Russian Empire. Montenegro or Croatia or Hungary wasn't part of Russian Empire. We have nothing to do with Russia. But they feel with Ukraine, it's also that for Vladimir Putin, it's a personal issue. For the Tsar, it's a personal issue. But I write in my book how he feels about Ukraine. He feels that Ukraine is actually Russia. The Ukrainians, many Ukrainians are outraged by this, but it's still true. We have to understand how Vladimir Putin feels. And he feels that Ukraine and Belarus, by the way, is part of the Russian world. They should be part or allied with Russia. Otherwise, he feels insecure about the future of Russia. And we don't have to accept his opinion, but we have to understand his opinion, because if we don't understand the opinion of Vladimir Putin and his people, not all the Russians think this way, but Vladimir Putin and his close allies in the Kremlin think this way, that Ukraine is part of the Russian world. And even the neutrality of Ukraine, that it's not really, it can be between NATO and Russia, even that for them is a compromise.
But it shouldn't have been the same thing, let's say, when Estonia joined NATO or Latvia. Anyhow, all those countries that are very close to Russia, to St. Petersburg, for instance, shouldn't that have threatened Russia just as much or even more?
Yes, when Estonia joined and when Latvia and Lithuania joined, Russia was, first of all, weaker. Russia had a period of weakness. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was a weaker country. So Russia couldn't stop these countries to join. They couldn't stop. First, we joined, Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic joined in 1999, and they couldn't stop it. Then other countries joined, but before Russia was strong enough. And again, Estonia is very close to St. Petersburg, that's true. They were very angry about Estonia joining, and they had a cyber attack on Estonia, a terrible cyber attack on Estonia, but they didn't attack Estonia directly. So that's the difference, that they were still weak to do this. But after 2008, they felt that they are strong enough to attack those countries who are not yet in NATO. So Georgia and Ukraine was promised NATO membership at the Bucharest summit in 2008. So the promise went out. I mean, it was not really a full promise. It was like one day you can be member of NATO. But for Russia, it was enough to, after a Georgian provocation, so the Georgians were not very wise. They provoked Russia, and Russia used the opportunity to defeat Georgia in 2008. And then 2014 came Ukraine. It's a very gray event, because some of Russia invaded Crimea that time 8 years ago, and Russia helped the separatists, who are mostly Russian, ethnic Russian in eastern Ukraine, to separate from Ukraine. But we have to tell the truth. So I always say that we have to understand both sides, even if Russia is the invader. Russian language and Russian people were attacked in 2014 by Ukrainian nationalists. So that's also true. But what Putin is saying today, that 14,000 was killed, that's not true. A few hundred, not more than 100 Russians were killed in really terrible incidents. And the Russians, use this as an explanation to attack 8 years later, which is not valid. But it's true,
and that would be my next question, actually. The whole Donbass genocide that Putin's been bragging about lately, how much of it is Russian propaganda? How much of it is reality?
So in 2014, people were killed in the Donbass, and people were killed in Odessa, people were killed in Kharkov by Ukrainian nationalists. That's true. But, the biggest killing is 42 people in Odessa. That's a lot. That's terrible. But not the 14,000 is simply not true. It's propaganda. I don't have all the data because it's very murky. Some Ukrainians say that nothing happened. That's not true. Russians say that 14,000 were killed. That's absolutely not true. So the reality is that, as I said, there were killing. There was a lot of humiliation of Russians, that you shouldn't speak Russian, you just speak Ukrainian. It happened to all the minorities in Ukraine, that there was a lot of attack on minorities after 2014. I'm Hungarian. We have Hungarian people in Ukraine, and I visited my friends in Ukraine. the Hungarian inhabited part of Ukraine, and I was told by two big people not to speak Hungarian in a pub because it's Ukraine. And of course, it creates tension when there is a nationalist movement. And I understand also that Ukrainians were oppressed by Russians for a very long time, so they don't like to hear Russian, and they also don't like to hear something. Not all Ukrainians, it's a minority of Ukrainians, but still a lot of things, bad things happened. But you know, it's not like 14,000 people. That's a lie. So the Russians.
But just before, I beg your pardon, just before I pass the word to Kachita, because she also has her own questions, I want to just to finalize this topic in particular. It has been said that mass graves have been discovered in the region of Donbass. Any truth to that? You have been there, as far as I know. So, do you see any truth in it, or is pure propaganda?
Well, you know, there can be graves, there can be people shot, but there was a big war there. You know, 14,000 people died on both sides. So there can be mass grave for soldiers who died. There can be mass grave for separatists who died. That's possible. You know, I traveled all the region. I haven't seen, you know, I haven't heard a story that like hundreds or thousands were killed. That's what I can tell you. It's possible that 15 people were captured somewhere and they were shot by the Ukrainians. But also mass grave can be put by Russians. I mean, if you go back in time, you know, in Katyn, I don't know if you remember the story from the Second World War. The Soviet Union killed more than 10,000 Polish officers, and then they said they were killed by the Germans. No, they were killed by the Soviets. So there can be a lot of mass graves, but you have to investigate who killed the people. And again, I say that this is an exaggeration, a big exaggeration from the Russian side, that they were massacred by the thousands. That there is another truth, that the separatist republics and the Crimea, the life was made harder by the Ukrainians after they seceded from Ukraine. Also in Crimea, the water was cut off. The water of Crimea comes from what is actually it was captured by Russia from the Dnieper River within Ukraine. So they can explain a lot of things, the Russians, and some of it is true. But for this invasion, I don't see any valid reason for this terrible invasion. Even if there was hundreds of Russians killed, today now we have 10,000 or more than 10,000 killed on both sides just in 2 weeks. So I personally, you know, I have an understanding for what Mr. Putin thinks, because I studied him for 20 years. What he thinks, what he does, how he enjoys life. I wrote even about his passions in my book, how he likes to live. But definitely he is not the person who is not ready to lie. He's a very tough, very cruel person, and he is ready to lie to achieve his goals. That's very sure.
We're going to cover more on that, because I want you to talk more about your book, which I found really interesting. But Katja, please, if you have any questions, that's the time. Yes, hold on. You can put the book on. Let's see the cover once again, please. So that's Dr. Attila's book under the pen name of David Otter. Is that how your alter ego is called?
Otter. It's from Finland, the name, because there are a lot of things about Finland in the book also.
Okay, I thought it was more on the French side when I first saw it. Okay, so David Otter, that's the pen name of Dr. Attila. So I strongly recommend the book. I read the first one. It's really good. You have the second one released, and you are about to release the third one, I assume, right?
No,
it's a trilogy.
Actually, the second one is being released, and the third one was titled Invasion and Defeat. The third one I started to write before the invasion happened, so it would have been about the invasion of Ukraine. So maybe the third book will be a bit different. Maybe I will write about the invasion of Taiwan. I don't know, but the book here is about how we get to the invasion of Ukraine. So the last page talks about the invasion of Ukraine. It was finished last year, so unfortunately it's happening now.
All right. Okay, Katja, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Attila. Welcome to For News. Welcome to Brazil.
Obrigado.
My first. Thank
Obrigado.
you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
My first question, por que Putin ainda não tomou Kiev? Teve erro de estratégia?
Okay, so the question is, why hasn't Mr. Putin taken Kiev yet? Was it an error in strategy or just, and now I'm going to add a little bit to the question, was it an error strategy, as Katja asked, or there was also some kind of weakness in that, or perhaps some kind of sentimentality that prevented him from taking over the city?
So there is no sentimentality in Putin, believe me. He is not a sentimental person. If he could have, if he could take Kiev, he could have taken it already. So the issue is, I think, with the Russian invasion and aggression, is that they were not imagining so much Ukrainian resistance. In 2014, the Ukrainians resisted very little. 10,000 Ukrainians surrendered in Crimea basically without a fight. So I think the Russians misjudged the Ukrainians, and near Kiev they had a very big attack in the first morning with special operation troops, and they got defeated. Russia got defeated against the attack of Hostomel airport. It was a very big loss of life for Russian special forces. And since then they try to come with the ground troops, not with helicopters. It's if you have time, and for the audience, if you have time, just watch the video of the attack of the first day of the invasion. They attacked with helicopters, which is very costly because some helicopters were shot down. People die on the helicopter, and the special forces, they are, even for Russia to lose special force people, it's a big thing because they are the best soldiers. So they couldn't capture Kiev with a special force, a direct attack. And now they have to bring in a lot of people to capture Kiev. Kiev have more than 10,000 defender, or even more, maybe even 30,000. It's a big number, and a lot of people, average people in Kiev, is ready to defend Kiev. So that's what they didn't. It's a mistake from Russia to think. It was a mistake to think that Ukraine is going to be easy. Ukrainian army is now much stronger than it used to be 8 years ago. The Ukrainians are much more ready to fight the Russians than 8 years ago. That's the issue. That it's a very classic case of a stronger country. Russia is much stronger than Ukraine, but still underestimate the force of the country. And so Ukraine is doing I'm neutral in this, but I have to say that Ukraine is doing a heroic fight against a stronger enemy. Russia is a lot stronger.
I want you to correct me here, or perhaps give me your point of view on that, because the impression I had so far is that Russia could have taken Kiev, but because Kiev is the mother of Russia, there's all these historical points that they take into consideration. It wasn't taken as strongly in the sense that it would be destroyed beyond repair. Which part of it did I get wrong?
Yeah, I think you are right that Kiev has a special place in the Russian heart, because Kiev and Rus for Russia is the start of Russia. So the birthplace of Russia for Russians is Kiev, and the birthplace for Ukrainians, the birthplace of Ukraine for Ukrainians is also Kiev. So it's a very contested city. Whose birthplace, who started in Kiev, the history? I think both. As a neutral, as a Hungarian, I can tell you that I think both Russia, Ukraine, and even Belarus was born with the Kiev Rus. So yes, there is a special place for the churches, for the city, for Russians, for Vladimir Putin. But again, the first attacks were with light troops. So he wanted to attack Kiev with not so many people, not with artillery, not with airstrike. So that's how they got defeated. So yes, he didn't want to attack Kiev with heavy artillery. We will see what will happen next. Yes, with Kiev, he will be more cautious, I think, than with other towns because of what you said, because of the historical significance of Kiev for Russians and for Putin himself. Mr. Putin is a man of history. So he reads a lot of history. He knows history, at least the Russian version of history, which is not the Ukrainian version of history, of course. So maybe he will take care of the special places in Kiev, but most of Kiev is not so special. Most of Kiev is high-rise building. It's a bit like Sao Paulo with a lot of high buildings. It's a city of 3 million. It's by Brazilian standards, it's a small city, but by European standards, it's a very big city. It is more than 700 square kilometers. It has hills, it has forests, it has a big river in the middle. So it's very hard to take. It's not an easy place to go in. Believe me, it's a big, big, big city.
Ok. Catita?
Posso fazer minha segunda pergunta, Edu?
Por favor.
Doutora Attila, excluir a Rússia da SWIFT não seria ruim ao mercado de capitais? E até onde as sanções prejudicariam apenas a Rússia?
Okay, so the question is, how far those sanctions, they compromise only Russia, not the rest of the world, and if it wasn't a mistake to exclude Russia from SWIFT. And now, just a little bit of myself on that question as well, we see how much China is benefiting from that, by providing the alternative to SWIFT. So in your opinion, how much it can affect the West and the countries that are imposing the sanctions on Russia?
Two fantastic questions. So I think it will affect the world very badly. Not only Russia is of course affected badly by the sanctions of the West, but the West is not anymore that strong that Russia cannot respond with their own sanctions. So Russia, the biggest problem for not for Brazil and not for South America, but for the world, is that Ukraine and Russia are both big exporters of food. So if Russia doesn't export wheat, if Russia doesn't export meat, food outside Russia, and Ukraine cannot export because of the war, a lot of people will go hungry. Because these two countries are very important in food, especially Russia. So Russia provides food for half of the world. It's a very big country with not so many people. Russia has less people than Brazil. Russia has 145 million people. So it's a big country. It's the biggest country in the world, but it has not so many people. So they can export food. That's one of the most important. The other is fertilizer. Russia is the most important exporter of fertilizer. So if you want to, have good results on your agricultural field, you need fertilizer. Russia stopped fertilizer for the world. They are not exporting, which means that many countries, even if you have enough land to have crops, without fertilizer, the result, the yield will be much less. So a lot of countries actually, because of lack of Russian export and because of food and because lack of Russian export of fertilizers, they will get hungry. The third one is oil and gas. So Russia is the biggest source of gas, natural gas for Europe. And if they cut the gas, Europe can freeze the next winter. There is not enough gas in Europe, and we can buy from the US a bit, we can buy from Qatar, but it's not enough. And if we buy for a very high price, other countries will not be able to buy. So Europe is rich. We can take away the gas from other countries. So Russia is very important in that. And oil prices, I think all of you, the viewers, even in Brazil, can feel that oil prices go up because this war. And the Americans, I think it's a crazy idea to stop Russian export of oil, because if there is no Russian export of oil, the oil price will be $300, $400. Can you imagine how people will pay for this extremely expensive fuel? Again, this goes for inflation, it goes for food prices skyrocketing, it goes for hunger. So Russia can, respond with a lot of things to the sanctions. But going back to SWIFT, I think it's an excellent question. Not all of Russian banks were switched off SWIFT. Only some of the biggest banks. And you know why? Because the Western countries are dependent in many things coming from Russia. I can tell you that, for example, if Russia is not exporting certain types of metals like titanium, like palladium, many Western countries will have the less opportunity to produce airplanes, will have less opportunity to produce special kind of tools, because they need titanium for this. And Russia is a very important country in terms of raw materials. They can do a lot of hurt to the world Boeing is the biggest importer of Russian titanium for the airplanes, and it's very hard to replace. You cannot open a mining business in a few days or in a few years. You cannot have enough oil in a few days or even a few years if Russian oil is not on the market. So I think, yes, SWIFT was introduced, sanctions, and it created a bad mood in Russia. And of course, they lost a lot of money with this and a lot of opportunities to trade. But we also have to see that they can strike back. You know, I think that Russia now, and especially with China, are almost, if you add Russia to China, they are as strong as America. America is no longer the superpower of the world. China and Russia together definitely equals America. So that's the reason the Chinese can benefit from this for sure. China wants to be #1 in the world. And if Russia helps them, they can be #1 maybe 10 years before they would have been #1 otherwise. So it's a big thing for China. But of course, China is also losing money because China is an importer of oil. So the high oil prices are not helping China at all. So for China, it's a double-edged sword. It can lose a lot on the short term, and it can gain a lot if Russia will be dependent on China more. It can gain a lot. It can gain cheap gas export. It can gain cheaper oil. It can gain technology. Russia have a superior technology in fighter planes, much better fighter engines. So in my book, the first scene of my second book, which is coming out soon on Amazon, is how Russians and Chinese are negotiating on engines for fighter planes. It's a big thing. And you know, until now, the Russians didn't want to sell the technology to China. Why? Because they wanted to keep the best technology for themselves. It's not as good as the American, but it's pretty good. The Chinese are not that good. Also with submarines, Russia has better technology. Also with air defense system, S-400, Russia has better technology. They can all sell it to China. And China, if the West, you know, there is a big sanction system against Russia. And China can provide Russia with a lot of things in return, with money, with opportunities, investment. So it's a very dangerous game. I think the Americans are playing. Actually, that's what I write in my books, that we are giving Russia in a way up to China. And China can be #1 much sooner in the world with this.
No doubt. Just going back a little bit on the subject and playing the devil's advocate for a bit here. From my perspective, there was a little betrayal of the Ukrainian people when Ukraine itself owned Russia, turning its back and wanting to join NATO and the EU and saying we don't need Russia anymore. Bearing in mind that a huge part of the GDP of Ukraine comes from Russia. The Russian guys goes through Ukraine and it's taxed and everything that we already know. In your opinion, should Mr. Putin have acted in a different way other than this military operation, as he calls it? And what's the perception of the Russian people on this whole scenario?
So surely President Putin should have acted in a different way. Because, you know, you don't start a war which can not only kill a lot of Ukrainians and Russians, it can kill a lot of people in Africa because of hunger. It can destroy the industry and the good life in several countries. But I said before, because of high prices, because of lack of food. So it's a very bad war for everyone. As for the, let's say, betrayal of the Ukrainian people, you know, the Ukrainian people are not united. Now they are, I think with the Russian invasion, they are becoming more united. But the eastern part of the country, they spoke Russian. Many of them were ethnic Russian, are still ethnic Russian. So they wanted to have better relations with Russia. They didn't want to go to NATO. But the western part of the country that speaks Ukrainian wanted to join Europe. Not only because Europe is a better place, but also because they don't like the Russians. Because the Russians oppress them. Language is very important in our region. You know, Brazil is a big country. Everybody speaks Portuguese, and the other countries speak similar Spanish. I mean, Spanish is not that far from Portuguese. But in our countries, you know, Europe has a lot of languages. Of course, Ukrainian and Russian is close, but there is a lot of historical bad blood between Ukrainians and Russians, Western Ukrainians and Russians. and also between Ukrainians of one part of the country and the other. So that's, you know, betrayal. Some parts of Ukrainians wanted to go west. The other parts of Ukrainians wanted to be neutral between the west and the east, or wanted to go to Russia, to join Russia. Some, not very, I think a small minority of Eastern Ukrainians always wanted to go to Russia, especially in Crimea. So in Crimea, the Russians are at home because those people, the majority of Crimeans, actually are okay with Russian rule. So that's how I would describe that. It's not a betrayal. It's like a big debate within Ukraine, which way to go. And this debate, internal debate, ended up in a big war. And also, I think it was the Americans. It's a big fault that they didn't see it coming, or they saw it coming and they wanted to engage Russia this way. It's a conspiracy theory, so I wouldn't say that. But anyway, it was very unwise to bring Ukraine to the West, because I knew personally that it can create a big conflict. I didn't believe that Putin will attack. I believe that he will just strangle Ukraine. You know, so strangling for years and years and years, destroying economy, for years and years have subversive actions, cyber attack, but not direct invasion. Direct invasion is a crime. Subvert invasion is also a crime, but direct invasion and killing so many people, even if Russia has some historical right in feeling bad about NATO coming to its border, I think it's too much. It's too much.
Although the perception that he portrays is that he's not invading Ukraine, but defending the two new republics. There's also that, exactly. So it's, I think it's a bit of a gray area.
Can I respond to this? So if he would defend only Donbas, he could have done that, but he went to attack Kiev, which is very far from Donbas. He went to attack Kherson, which is very far from Donbas. So it's an attack everywhere in Ukraine. Like even for defense of Donbas, people would accept it more easily in the world. But that's why so many people are outraged, because the war is everywhere, not only in Donbas. So I personally believe that he made a very big miscalculation. The Russians can win the war because they are much stronger, but they are losing the hearts of people around the world because of this. Because much of it cannot be explained away with the Ukrainian Nazis. There are some Ukrainians who are really very strongly nationalist and very badly anti-Russian. That's true, but this is a minority of Ukrainians. So you cannot punish the whole people for the sins of a minority. So that's why, I understand Mr. Putin. He wants his dream to come through of a greater Russia. He wants to end the humiliation of Russia by the West, because Russia was humiliated by the Americans. I think in Brazil, the people of Brazil can understand how the Americans can talk. They talk you down, that you are nobody. Be happy that we talk to you. Americans sometimes be very aggressive. And of course, the Russians say that we cannot invade Ukraine. You invaded Iraq. That's what the Russians say. You invaded Libya. What did you do in Syria? And there is truth in this. There is some truth that the Americans did some terrible things. Iraq is, I was desk officer for Iraq. I described some parts of this invasion in my book, because, I've been everywhere, what I describe in my book. So it's my personal story in some parts. So Iraq was terrible. Hundreds of thousands of people died, but you cannot explain one invasion with another invasion, which happened in 2003. That's my opinion, that one bad things, what the Americans did, and the Americans did actually a lot of bad things around the world, not only in Iraq. Afghanistan, 20 years, how many Afghans got killed? And Taliban proposed peace to America 3 years after the invasion, and the Americans said, no, we are winning. You didn't win, and a lot of people died, and we could have had peace in 2006 or 2007 in Afghanistan. So Americans made a lot of mistakes and even crimes, but it cannot be explained. And how they talk to countries, I think they talk to Brazil also, and to South America, like, we are the strong and you are the small. And Brazil is like a very big country, a very big power. So they talk to Russia like this, that, oh, come on, you don't have anything, just oil. You don't have anything, just gas. No. The Russians got humiliated, and now Putin is showing that I have an army, I have an air force, I have nuclear weapons. So don't talk to me like this anymore. So in a way, this is part of the conflict that the Americans didn't understand how to talk to the Russians.
Okay, all right. So before we move on with our collaborator, Kachita, do you have anything to add? Any other question? Mais alguma pergunta, Kachita?
Sim. Zelensky se elegeu com a promessa de retomada da Crimeia. Também prometeu a paz em Donbás e Lubansk, dentre outras promessas. Essas promessas também teriam afrontado a Rússia?
The question is, Zelensky was elected by promising to unite Ukraine, to regain Crimea and Donbass. Would those promises have irritated the Russians, more so Mr. Putin, to the extent that he lost it and now we're seeing what we're seeing?
So originally Zelensky promised peace. And of course he promised Crimea, which is impossible for Ukraine, I think, to get it back without the total defeat of Russia. And, Russia will not be totally defeated. So that was, he's a politician, so you promise a lot of things. But Zelensky himself was not a hardcore nationalist. So he tried to make peace with Russia on the Donbass, how to reintegrate Donbass with compromise from Ukraine and compromise from Russia and the separatists. He tried. But, as I said, there are some very strongly nationalist people in Ukraine. So Zelensky tried, but he was threatened that if you do this, we will rise up against you. So a lot of nationalists, when Zelensky tried to speak with Putin, started to threaten Zelensky. And so Zelensky stopped it, and he started to talk very nationalistic himself. But, I think it's very important to understand that even a president of a country cannot do everything he wants. So Zelensky, originally, I think he wanted peace, but he couldn't do it because a large part of Ukrainian society was not ready for peace. They wanted to defeat the Russians, which was impossible. So what they wanted, actually, the Western countries to help them. But the Western countries will not help them with weapons, even today. They help them with weapons, but they will not going to go there to fight. Americans will never go to fight in Donbass. Ukrainians must fight, and they have no chance. So I think, yes, not Zelensky angered so much. Zelensky also, but it's a personal. I can tell you about the Putin personal problem with Zelensky. He has a personal problem. But the nationalists of Ukraine angered Putin a lot. That he cannot make this Minsk II, it's called the Minsk II process, to be agreed upon, because he wanted actually to reintegrate these two regions, these two pro-Russian regions to Ukraine, to have a voice in Ukraine. If this and to have a Russian tool in Ukraine to keep Ukraine out of NATO. So when he saw it's not happening, that's how he attacked Zelensky. And what about the personal? Because I said that politics. Presidents don't always do what they want, but presidents sometimes they do what is in their heart. So Putin just hates Zelensky because Zelensky attacked the best friend of Putin in Ukraine, Viktor Medvedchuk. Zelensky started, not Zelensky officially, but because of Zelensky, there was a trial against, there was an investigation against Viktor Medvedchuk that he's a traitor. And it's a very serious accusation. And his newspapers were closed down. Russian-speaking newspapers, TV channels were closed down. So Medvedchuk, who is close to Putin, was attacked personally. And for Putin, it's personal. That my friend is attacked, I am attacked. So that's part that he hates Zelensky because Putin thinks that Zelensky likes drugs, likes to smoke hashish and to take drugs. So he hates people who take drugs also. So he has this, when he talks about the drug addict nationalist or Nazi, he talks about Zelensky. But Zelensky is not a Nazi, he's Jewish. So he's not Nazi at all. And he was very, at the beginning, he was very open to be better with minorities. But Zelensky even greeted the Hungarians of Ukraine in our own language, and we liked him for this. But he cannot do whatever he wants because of the real nationalists in Ukraine. And now he's a hero in Ukraine because he's ready to fight back.
So it's safe to say that Mr. Putin is not like, as I put earlier, a sentimental person, but a passionate person in that regard, right?
Yeah, you can be cold and calculating, you can be a strategist, but you can also be a passionate person at the same time. No, that's what I describe in my book, that he's not an easy person. He's not like one side or another side. It's all gray. He has some excellent mind, excellent analysis, how Putin sees the world. That's why he's president of Russia. You cannot be president of Russia for more than 20 years without being very clever. He's very clever, but he has his passion. He has his passion for greater Russia, to create Russia, the glory of Russia. But he has passion against people. So if he doesn't like someone, that's dangerous, because he doesn't like traitors. He doesn't like those who work for the West, and sometimes they get killed. So President Putin is also a killer. He ordered the killing of several people who worked for the West and spies, because he despises them. He really hates these people. So he's passionate, but he's also calculating at the same time. And I think as he's getting older, and he's going to be 70 soon, he wants to have this heritage. And that's why he went into this war, that he will create a big Russian victory before he retires or before he dies. Of course, he's 70, so he can live for quite a long time. But he sees himself as the new Peter the Great. Peter the Great created the Russian Empire. So I recreate the Russian Empire. I will make Russia great again, in a way like Donald Trump said about the US. But the US was great before, and it's great today. It's a big country. But Russia was really down. Russia was really poor. Russia was really desperate when President Putin became president in 2000. So he said that I'm rising Russia. I'm rising Russia. The people's life was better and better under his rule until now, and until actually first the 2014 invasion and the sanctions really were hurting the Russian people. Now they are going down, but he still believes that he's doing good for Russia, and that's the dangerous, because if you don't believe in what you do, you can be talked to. No, but if you
going
believe
back to please continue.
What he's doing. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, going back to Zelensky, which is somebody I have no sympathy whatsoever, personally speaking here. Isn't this Jewish card very convenient for somebody who was on the news not very long ago for supporting ultra-nationalist movements? And not even to mention that he's not Jewish, really. His grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever was, but himself, not really. As a Jewish man, I say that. And so I think it's a very convenient card to play in this conflict.
You are absolutely right that it's a convenient card to play, but I looked at Zelensky's, how he talked. So he didn't talk like an extreme nationalist. So personally, I don't think that he's an extreme nationalist. He spoke Russian better than Ukrainian before starting to really learn Ukrainian. But if you are a president of Ukraine, and if you are under pressure also, and of course a lot of things can happen. He changed. Maybe he became a very, very big nationalist by now, and now he's an actor. He can play any role. He's a good actor, actually. He's a famous actor.
Fair point.
And of course, he's using the Jewish card, that I cannot be nationalist because I'm Jewish. Of course he can be. You can be both Jewish and the Ukrainian nationalist. I don't believe that originally he was a Ukrainian nationalist. He was an actor. He was maybe a patriot of, helping Ukraine. Yes, you are right. I don't think that he's a religious Jewish person. Definitely not. He's a party guy. He really likes to party. He likes women. Actually, Putin likes women too. But Putin is more reserved personally in his personality. So I don't think that he's an extreme nationalist, or he will be an extreme nationalist. The extreme nationalists of Ukraine are really, really tough guys. So Zelensky is not that kind of person. But of course, you have to see that in Ukraine, it's very interesting that the patron of Zelensky, Ihor Kolomoisky, he's Jewish, and he's doing a lot for the Jewish people. He did a lot for the Jewish people in Ukraine. But he also employed extreme nationalists for his private army. Ihor Kolomoisky has a private army called Dnipro. He has a city under his rule, basically. So Ukraine is a very strange country for a European country that people basically had, and even now I think has a bit of private armies. So yes, it's like very that you can be a Jewish person still supporting very extremist people because they serve you. So it's a gray world. A lot of things can happen. So it's gray. Ukraine is gray country with a lot of contradictions.
Okay, well, thank you for the explanation. We have another question from our journalist collaborator Jorge Serrão that's going to come now. Rubão, por favor.
Hello.
Dr. Attila Demkó, what are the political internal consequences for Vladimir Putin of this invasion of Ukraine?
Thank you. All of your questions are really great, and this is also very important. Mr. Putin started this war being confident that he can finish quite fast, maybe in a few weeks. Now it's very visible that the war is causing a lot of casualties for Russia. Russians lost 140 tanks until today. 140 tanks. Russians lost hundreds of artillery pieces, APCs, weapon systems, airplanes, helicopters. So they lost a lot. They lost thousands of people, and they had terrible sanction on Russia. So Russian people feel from one day to another, their life standard to fall. They cannot travel. Russians like to travel, and they cannot travel anymore because the Russian Aeroflot, the Russian place cannot go anywhere. So they can travel maybe to Belarus, but Belarus is not a tourist destination, I can tell you. So they like the sea. They like to go to Caribbean. They like to go to Florida. They like to go to Turkey, Brazil, Egypt. So they cannot go. Of course, the Russians will be angry. So he's losing. He has lost the middle class of Russia, but he didn't lose the average Russian who is not so rich or poorer Russians, because they feel that they have propaganda, very strong propaganda in Russia. If they repeat that Ukrainian Nazis are killing Russians, and there is a bit of small truth in it, people will believe it's happening everywhere. You understand what I mean? So he will have, until the propaganda machine is behind him, he will have enough Russians to support him. He started this war with more than 60% of Russians supporting him. I think it's much lower now, but still, I think most Russians support him, and there is no alternative for Putin. So there is talk of Sergei Shoigu, he's the Minister of Defense, that he maybe is going against him, but I think it's just an article. But it's true that Sergei Shoigu and the military is very powerful. But on the long term, if this war doesn't go well, Russian society can be very angry at Mr. Putin. And if Russian society is angry, some Russian influential people, oligarchs, army can do something maybe against Putin. That's possible. It's a dangerous game from now. It's a very dangerous game for Putin. He has to win. He has to win this war fast without, let's say, 20, 30, or 40,000 Russians dead. Because if there are so many Russians dead, it's a big thing in Russia. It's the population of Russia is going down. There are no children. Most families has like one child. So if your only child dies in a war, only son dies in a war, what will the mothers think? Like 10,000 mother, 20,000 mother, 30,000 mother. So he's in a dangerous situation. But this makes the whole world dangerous, because Vladimir Putin and Russia has equal nuclear power than the United States. They can destroy. Well, you are lucky in Brazil, they will not attack you, but they can destroy the Northern Hemisphere. They can destroy us here in Europe. They can destroy the Americans. So we have to avoid putting Mr. Putin into a corner. Otherwise, he will attack. And, he's a very passionate person. He was very rational before, but I see his passionate side rising. So it's a dangerous moment. But of course, to answer the question, I think there can be, in the future, if the war is going badly for Russia. Today, Russians achieved some important results, but still it's not going very well for Russia, not as well as he thought. There can be problem for him.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One more from Jorge Serrão. Rubão, por favor.
One defeat in Ukraine can cause the Putin's fall in Russia?
So yes, I don't think that Russia will be defeated in Ukraine, even with a lot of losses. They will use stronger weapons. So, but if they are defeated, yes, as I said before, he can be in danger of losing his power, and in Russia it sometimes means that losing your life. So yes, he has to win, or he has to look strong to his population that it's a victory or it's a compromise, but it's a compromise good for Russia. Otherwise, he is in trouble. So yes, I agree that it can happen.
Okay, and now our last question from our collaborator, Pastor Sandro Rocha. He's going to ask in Portuguese, I'm going to translate it. So, Rubão, please, por favor.
Para o senhor, aí que tem representatividade e conhecimento na OTAN, o Brasil, o presidente Bolsonaro foi à Rússia para buscar a tecnologia da bomba atômica? O que a OTAN pensa sobre o Brasil e a bomba atômica? Muito obrigado.
Okay, so the question is, in your opinion, our president has been to Russia a few weeks ago. The reason for his visit was to gather technology for development of an atomic bomb, and what would be the NATO's opinion about Brazil having nuclear power?
Well, I think it's NATO is not important in this. The United States is important in this, and United States would be very much against Brazil have the nuclear weapon. Americans don't want anybody to compete with them in South America. And Brazil is a very big country, a strong country with big military industry. So, and actually, we are buying airplanes from Brazil. Mr. Bolsonaro was in Hungary also. So we agreed on more military cooperation. Brazil is an important country. Can you imagine Americans would be happy for Brazil to have nuclear weapons? What would happen to American influence in South America, to Brazil becoming like a very big power? No, America would do everything to stop Brazil having nuclear weapons. I'm pretty sure about that. But it's not NATO. NATO, European countries are not strong enough to step up against Brazil. I mean, can you see Portugal is a small country today. It used to be, Portuguese Empire. So they are a small country, 10 million people. Even Germany is not so strong. So it's not the Europeans who would stop it happening. But I don't think it happened. The Russians will not sell the technology so easily. But if they do, if they would, it's 0% that they talked about this, I'm pretty sure. But it happens. America will try to push Brazil to the corner very, very, very strongly, very badly. So they are ready to do almost everything to stop other countries to have nuclear weapons. You look at Iran. What happened to Iran?
Exactly. Okay, well, thanks for answering all the questions. I would like you to speak more about your book, if you may. Just tell us a little more about the story, about the concept, which I found utterly interesting. So please.
So thank you for this opportunity. My book, The Fury of the Tsar series. So 2 is published, but 1 is not published yet on Amazon, but the first one is published. We are publishing the 2 books. Actually, the books are behind me. It's visible behind me, the book. I think it's the most neutral story you can read on the net, because I'm not Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, I'm not American. So I tell the bad things Russia is doing, and the manipulations and the false flag attacks, how they prepare, for example, an invasion. I tell that, not the invasion yet, but the preparation to Ukraine in the second book. But I also tell what the Americans are doing, how they manipulate the world in many places, the Balkans, what they do in Venezuela. So there is a storyline in Venezuela, how the Russians, what are they doing in Venezuela, and what are the Americans are doing in Venezuela. So it's like it's a story from a neutral person who is not American, not Russian, and that's why I can tell you the truth. How can I tell it? Because for 20 years I worked in a high position in the military and the Prime Minister's office, so I heard a lot of stories. So these are my stories. This is, not everything is reality. This is fiction. What I write, it's fiction. But still, I put a lot of real stories, a bit changed, because I cannot tell you secrets. So I changed them a bit, but the basis is true. How Russia is achieving their gains in some countries. For example, they blew up a bomb and they say somebody else did it. And I write about the techniques. But sometimes America does the same. Some wars America started are not with reason. So I tell you the stories how America entering wars without a reason, without a valid reason. So I don't think it's a popular book with Russians. I don't think it's a popular book with Americans. I think it should be a popular book with people who want to understand the world, how the world works, how the United States military industrial complex works, and how the Kremlin works, how the Russians think about the world. And also I introduced the ethnic tensions in Europe. So Europe, there are a lot of ethnic minorities, and all outside powers manipulate this, that some countries fight the other for 1,000, or not for 1,000, but for hundreds of years because of the ethnic tensions. So I talk a lot about the Yugoslav wars. I talk about the tension between Hungary and Romania. I talk about Ukraine. So I talk about a lot of things in this book, in these books. And the third one, you know, if somebody buys the second, at the end, you see the third one would have been about the invasion of Ukraine. But now I think the third book, which is under work, will be about Taiwan. So I write quite a lot in the book number 2 about China, how China sees the world, what China wants to achieve, what are the fears of China. So I want to explain the world to the readers, how I see it with more than 20 years of experience in NATO, in EU, in Ministry of Defense, and I'm also in the Prime Minister's Office of Hungary.
Okay, well, you can find the link in the description, okay? So I strongly recommend everyone to check it out. Worth it. Dr. Demkó, thank you very much for being here with us today. I hope you come back. The doors are always open. It was a pleasure talking to you. Okay, Cachita, do you have anything to say?
Não, somente agradecer ao Dr. Attila e aos nossos seguidores, né, pela honrosa participação.
So thank you very much for your kind invitation. I just want to say one more word from me. Now and the future, you will hear what I think the truth is. Not the American truth, not the European truth, not the Russian truth, but what I think the truth is. Of course, maybe it's through my eyes, but I will be always honest with you as I was honest with you today.
And we hope to see you again. Köszönöm szépen. Stay with us. Bom,
Obrigado.
pode cortar.
Obrigado.
Szívesen.